So, turns out making games is really hard actually. The stuff I made in the last two videos were really simple, and I didn't have to tread any new ground to make them. Once More with Spirit was literally just a port of a game that I already made, and Particular Battles is kind of a perfected version of a top-down shooter I made as a high school project. But this RTS thing is completely new, and I felt like I learned a lot more while making it. Not just about how to use the Godot engine to make things that I want, but more general things about how to lay out a coding project. Or more specifically, why it's really important not to do it the way that I did. I haven't come up with a name for the game yet, I've just been calling it RTS for real-time strategy. I also don't really care, I don't like this one nearly as much as the other two. Screw it. The map is rust-coloured, and there are teams, and they skirmish, so Rustbowl Team Skirmish is what we're going with. That'll be the subtitle, it's what we're going with. So, in RTS we have a base for each team, and one of them is controlled by the player. When you press the spacebar, it spawns a little square unit you can control by dragging a selection box around them with left click, and then right clicking where you want them to go. You can also hold shift while dragging the box around them to unselect the units inside that area, or you can hit tilde to unselect all the units. If you right click an entity that can be attacked, the unit will go into attack mode and track that target until it's destroyed. If you want to look at different parts of the map, you can zoom in and out with the plus and minus keys and pan around using the arrow keys. Your goal is to be the last team with a standing base. To do this, you have to order your units to attack the enemy bases, but also defend your own. You can only spawn a limited number of units before you run out of stock, and you can get more stock by capturing mines, which will automatically generate stock for you, allowing you to spawn as many units as you want, so long as you don't hit the max army size. You can have up to 3 enemy teams on the field at once. Each one of them will spawn units and try to complete the same goal as you before you can, and will attack every other colour of unit and base on the map. It would have been trivially easy to design an AI such that it could instantly beat the player. Simply send a few units to each mine, spawn as many units as it can, and then send them all on a beeline to the player's base. But that wouldn't be fun, so I had to do it the complicated way and make them act a little bit more like a real army. Each unit has 2 actions it can perform: explore and attack. All of them explore by default. They randomly choose a spot a fair distance away from themselves and then go to it. Once they reach it, they'll choose another random spot and then go there. This continues until a unit finds something that can be attacked, like a base, an enemy unit, or a mine. Then, they send a report back to their team's base telling it what they found. The base then tells all of its units about what that discovery is and that they should attack it. But I didn't want the whole army to swarm the first thing that one of them finds. Apart from anything else, that would be incredibly easy to exploit by drawing the whole army away from your base with a single unit. Instead, each unit reads the orders given to it by the base and decides whether to attack each target based on how high a priority that target has and how far away it is from that unit. If the priority isn't large enough to outweigh the distance to the target, the unit will keep doing whatever it was doing before. In RTS, unlike every other game that I've made, the player character isn't a physical object in the world. Instead, the player controls the camera and gives orders to their units from above. A lot of new challenges arise from this fact. Mainly, where do you put your variables? If you were controlling an avatar, it's simple. The variables relevant to the player should be contained in the same script that controls the player movement and actions. But now, the information about how the game world should look is scattered over so many different places. Each base has its health, a list of units it controls, a list of enemies those units can attack, and a number of resources it can use to make more units. Each unit has its health, a mission to complete, and a bunch of information about how and when it can attack. The mines have to handle multiple different teams vying for control at the same time, and then the camera has to handle dragging the selection box and controlling the units. The complexity of my last game doesn't come anywhere close to comparing with this. So I had to make a bunch of decisions about where everything was meant to go. Should the player's units decide how to respond to the player input? Or should the camera script order those units by calling their functions? Should the AI units decide on their own which action they should take next? Should their base give them orders? Should it be a mix of both? How should a mine handle being attacked by 2 or more teams at once? Should it wait until only one team is around before it starts getting captured? Should it tally up all the progress that was made by each team and wait until all of it is undone before it starts getting captured then? I never had to consider these sorts of things before. It's given me a real taste of the complexity of making games. Not just the technical complexity of writing code and getting a computer to do what's happening in your head, but the creative complexity of how to design that system in the first place. I did it on the fly this time, making new functions and variables as I went and putting them in whatever object had the most support for those features at the time. It sucked. I ended up having to rewrite half the code about half a dozen times before it was in a state that made sense. I'm definitely going to plan out which objects should be responsible for which parts of the game logic before I start writing code for the next project. But on top of designing a system of code that was easy to expand and work with, I also had to design a system for controlling the behaviour of game objects that made it actually fun to bloody play. Just look at the variables in a single unit for a sec. Most of this stuff is boilerplate and just tells the engine what nodes I'll be using in that code. And some of these are only used to calculate values in code that aren't set by me. But all of the ones here are dials that I use to control how they behave, and every single one of them can make the game feel totally different if I change it. The HP and reload times can change the game in obvious ways, but it's still interesting to talk about. Increasing the value of HP increases the time it takes to defeat this unit, which can slow down the pace of the game. Increasing the reload time increases the time it takes to deal the same amount of damage, which can also slow down the pace of the game. So increasing either of these values makes it take longer to complete the same task in game, but the way it feels when these variables is turned up is totally different. Look, I'll make two examples. One where the units have more HP, and one where the units have a higher reload time. But I'll balance them so it takes the same amount of time for each unit to die in both. With a higher reload time, the units take a noticeable break between each attack. It's long enough in this example that a player can react to a unit being attacked and send in reinforcements. Because a unit stays ready to shoot, a new unit joining a fight will likely be able to hit an enemy already engaged in that fight before that enemy can hit them. This makes sneak attacks way more risky. If 5 units arrive to defend a base within the space of 2 or 3 shots, then sending a single unit to try and take down a base stops being a viable strategy. As a result, building the biggest army becomes much more strategically important, increasing the value of mines for the player. Giving units more HP, on the other hand, makes them feel more substantial and important on the battlefield. It increases the chance that they can escape an encounter with enough health left over to be useful again in the future, which means that a retreat becomes a much more viable strategy. Because they spend less time on 1 HP, if you tell them to retreat, they are more likely to survive long enough to do some damage in a future encounter. Changing these simple variables can radically alter what players are likely to do in a game and completely change how it feels to play, and that's not even considering how the variables that govern enemy logic can change the game. Increasing the exploration distance means that each enemy will travel a longer distance in a random direction when in exploration mode. It might not seem like this matters much, but it actually makes the game way harder. I'll simplify the map a bit to explain. Each time the enemy takes a step, there's a 50-50 chance that their next step will be towards the player base. If the exploration distance is small, then there are more chances for the enemy to backtrack instead of going towards the base. With longer strides, however, the unit needs to move in the same direction fewer times to reach the player. This means that they will on average get there faster, giving the player less time to build their army and prepare. The curiosity stat and the priority distance fall-off stat control how likely a unit is to explore instead of attacking a target. Increasing them makes the game easier in some ways, but harder in others. With a higher curiosity or priority fall-off, enemies are less likely to send reinforcements on an attack. This means that it's easy to repel attacks on your base or individual units. But it also means that the enemies are going to spread out more, which means that they are more likely to be attacking multiple targets in the world at once. This means that it's harder for the player to focus and prioritize their next actions. I can think of a lot of ways I can improve this game. Adding a defend command to the enemy AI that makes them return to their base or mine when it's under attack. Adding a variety of units to the game to add a lot of strategy to resource management. Perhaps adding a medic unit that can repair bases and damage done to other units. And I'm sure there's a bunch of work I could do to make the game more appealing by adding lighting and better sprites and sound effects and music. And I could probably try and balance the game to make it more fun by tweaking all those variables that control enemy behavior. But the codebase for this game has just kind of ballooned out into this Gordian knot of technical debt to the point that doing any serious work on it would make me want to rewrite the whole thing from scratch. And I don't want to do that. I want to make new things. I've taken a lot of lessons from this, and while I haven't learnt quite as much as I'd hoped about enemy logic, I think it's time to lay this project to rest as well and move on to the next one. As always, there's a link in the description to the game's itch.io page, so you can check it out and play with the AI variables if you want. Okay, on to the next project. A core part of game design that often falls into the background is menu design. They are a major part of every game, but because a well-designed menu is one that puts as little friction as possible between the player and the information and controls they want access to, almost by definition, you never really remember the good ones. I want to try and get better at making this part of games as well, so my next project is going to be a game in a genre that is heavily based around menus, a JRPG, like Pokemon or the older Final Fantasies. To manage expectations a bit, I am not planning to make a game anywhere near as long as either of those. My goal is going to be 1 or 2 hours of content max, probably taking place in a single dungeon. The main thing I want is the menus to be intuitive, fun to use, and offer the player a lot of choice in how they handle encounters. I think the next project will be much easier than this one, but we'll see how that frickin' goes. Anyway, until next time, take care everyone.